Happy Homebrew Wednesday! Cue the fridge. Alrighty, happy Homebrew Wednesday! Milk the Funk t-shirt. Go check out the Milk the Funk group on Facebook. The home of everything that you need to know about sour beers. Speaking of sour beers, I did my first wort souring over the past couple of weeks. So wort souring is pretty much reducing the pH and getting that lactobacillus note in the wort before you boil it and then before you ferment it. Instead of making your traditional beer, boiling it up and putting it in the fermenter and adding the lactobacillus and your yeast. This is doing that souring but first, and then when you boil it you get rid of all that bacteria so that you can ferment it normally in a fermenter without the risk of all the other beers that you're going to put in there later on souring up. In saying that, I still put it in my glass carboy, which is my souring carboy. Right, originally I was going to do a sour mash, which involves leaving the mash, sitting in the mash tun at a high temperature for it to go funky and off. But I decided not to. I asked some people and some people gave me some feedback. Dan ABA led me to some resources to have a look at and listen to, some podcasts and bits and pieces. Did some reading in the Great American Sour book, which I have. And pretty much sour wort seemed like the better way to go. I chose to do my sour wort with a starter first, and then that starter I added to my wort and then soured the wort further and then added the wort to the kettle later on and then fermented it. So to start off with, I created a 1045 starter that I added 250 grams of sour grapes malt to. Now sour grapes malt is an acidulated malt, so that means it's had lactobacillus strain coated on it, and it's used in really small quantities in your mash to lower the pH of your mash. So I used that to grow or to harvest the lactobacillus that was on the grains in my starter. Now with the starter I placed it in one of my fermentation fridges, but pretty much it was on heat all the time because lactobacillus likes warm temperatures, and 49 degrees is its optimum temperature for multiplying and growing, but it can grow all the way down to 30 degrees. So I picked 37 degrees because I didn't want to blow up the fridge and catch it on fire. I thought 49 degrees was just getting a little bit too warm. So 37 degrees, which is 98 Fahrenheit. Now I did that for 3 days, and the pH going in was around about 5.2, 5.4ish, 5.2. I hadn't calibrated my pH meter then, so I was sort of going off pH strips. Since then I calibrated the pH meter so I could keep a close eye on what the pH was doing. After 3 days the pH dropped all the way down to 3.5. Now a pH of 3.5 is your magic marker pretty much. A lot of Saccharomyces yeast strains struggle to ferment out sugars in any wort that's under 3.5 pH. That's normally why the sour beers use Brett, because Brett thrives in that acidic environment. But I wanted to ferment this with US 05. Why not? It's cheap, it's easy, and it's just a trial just to see how I can sour up. The grain bill for this Berliner Weisse is pretty simple. It's 2 kg or 4.4 pound of Pilsner malt and 1 kg or 2.2 pound of wheat malt. So I put all that into my mash tun. This is to make a 19 litre finished batch size, or 5 gallon. Now, in my mash tun, I always underlet. So I have a false bottom in my mash tun that sucks the wort away and it pumps it through and back into my recirculation hose back onto the top, so that it's constantly recirculating while I do a mash. Now, when I underlet, I flood the mash tun from the bottom up. That means that it pushes all the air out of the grain as the water slowly rises up. Now, I sped this up because it takes a while. Now, the underletting allows me to do a 10-minute protein rest at 50 degrees or 122 degrees Fahrenheit. The amount of time it takes for the water to slowly come up through that grain bed and equalise from the HLT to my final volume that I need for mashing gives me a nice little time frame. And then I turn on my recirculation pump and it purges out the air from the pipeline and I recirculate. Now, I mash this. How long did I mash this for? I mashed this for 60 minutes at 66 degrees, 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, at the 45-minute mark, I actually stopped and I added some more sour grapes acidulated malt into it. I didn't want to add it in right at the beginning because, of course, that would affect the enzyme activity with the lactobacillus that was on the sour grapes malt. So I added it later towards the end of the mash time, the last 15 minutes, just so that it could pull off some more lactobacillus from that grain and add it to the final wort. To cool the wort down, I ran it back through my heat exchanger, but I turned the element off on my heat exchanger and I just ran cold water through it. Now I want to fill from the bottom because I want to try and eliminate as much oxidization as possible. So that's coming out of the heat exchanger at 43 degrees. Alrighty, there we go. Excuse the colour. Blue plastic looking at light yellow wort doesn't look that appetizing. And obviously it's cloudy because, hey, I haven't boiled it up, but this is going to all settle out and it's going to sit in a fermentation fridge with a heat pad at 30 degrees for the next 3 days. Now, I've measured the final gravity of this after sparging and it was 1044. I was aiming for 1045, so that's cool, I'm just 1 point off. And my pH for this with the starter that I had added, so there's all the grains that were left over. That starter, which had a pH of 3.5, added to this, which had a pH of 5.2 when it was in the mash tun, now has a final pH of 4.5. So I'll monitor the pH of this to make sure it doesn't drop below 3.5, because anything below 3.5 Saccharomyces has a bit of an issue with, and I'd have to use Brett, and I don't want to use Brett. I just want to use US04 in this. But that's that. This is going to go into its fridge and rest. And notice I filled it right up to the top, so there's no air in there. And also when I put the starter in there, I purged it with CO2 and degassed it because I poured it in and it would have oxidized up a little bit, so I gave it a bit of a shake around with CO2 in there to try and release all the oxygen that was in there, and just purge all that oxygen and replace it with CO2. Time to ferment this a bit more to get some more sourness out of that lactobacillus. So it's being fermented at 30 degrees or 86 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 days. Now within that period I started seeing a bit of activity, which means that I have a heterofermentative strain of lactobacillus, which means that it's creating ethanol and CO2. Now the other strain is a homofermentative, and that means that it doesn't create any ethanol. So my final pre-boil gravity worked out at 1030 after it was fermented for another 2 days, and the pH came out at 3.5. So now it's time to tip it into the kettle and boil it up. Now I'm only going to be boiling it for 30 minutes. It doesn't need a full 60 or 90 minute boil or anything like that. Primarily what you're doing is you're boiling it to kill all the bacteria and all the lactobacillus that's still in there, so that you can bottle it up and it's going to stop souring, but also it's not going to infect any of your other brewing equipment. It got a head on it when I was boiling it up, and this was awesome. I'd never seen foam form like this. It was like a meringue. So a quick little time lapse of it as it was coming up to hot break. I thought it was going to boil over, but luckily it didn't. It sort of got right up to the top, and then finally hot break just took control of it and pulled it all back down again. I had a can of spray water just on hand that I could get a little squirt as well, just in case I got worried. Get a bit steamy, get a bit hot and steamy. Look at that, it's like a monster. Righty, time for the hops. I've got some Hallertau. They're 2.8 alpha acid. I've only got 15 grams. They're going in the last 15 minutes of the boil, so it's only going to give 4 IBUs, and that's it. That's all I want in this, because hops affect the pH and stuff. So I want to make this as sour as I possibly can. So, plonk. There they are. I've got my yeast rehydrated. Now there are 2 packets of US-05 in there, so I'm sort of over pitching this batch because I want to make sure that it takes off properly. If it's got a low pH, it gets a little bit harder on the yeast, so I want to make sure that it will ferment out as fast as possible and get the job done. There's also a little bit of Fermade and Go Firm in there just to help the yeast survive the harshness of the sour wort. As with all brew days, my camera battery ran out. So I ended up with a final gravity, a post-boil gravity, sorry, of 1032. So it is in the glass wide mouth carboy, and it is fermenting away at 21 degrees or 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Cheers to James and Steve from Basic Brewing. A couple of weeks ago they posted a video about sour worting and did their own Berliner Weiss. So that was cool to quickly get a chance to watch that before I jumped into it. They showed me some little tips and bits and pieces, and it's always good to watch somebody else do a brew before you jump into something brand new. Also cheers to Michael Tonsmeyer for the American Sour book. Wow, that's a great book. It is so cool. I'm so going to be getting into sours. I am going to be doing another Berliner Weiss, but I am going to be using lactobacillus and a German ale yeast. White Labs 1007, I believe. So I'm going to do it the proper way. So this one was an example just to see if I could make a sour beer quickly, because some sour beers, they take a bit of time for them to fully mature and to get that complexity in there. And the reason for doing this sour beer is that there's a competition coming up in the end of January, and I wanted to get one in the bottle and see what it was going to be like. Also cheers to Dan ABA, who is a fountain of knowledge when it comes to sour beers. He pointed me to some podcasts and some other resources that I could review for my sour worting. And obviously he is a member of Milk the Funk, which is the Facebook group all about doing sour beers. So go and join up Milk the Funk and have a little look-see and see what's going in there. And you know, sours are going to be the next IPA. Anyway, cheers guys, cheers to everybody that contributed and gave me some tips and bits and pieces on my first sour worting. Let's see how it works out. Cheers, have yourself another.